Morning, everyone. Today I am going to be throwing and making a cigar ashtray. This was a special request. I made this one previously and the person loved it so much they asked me to make several more for some buddies. So this one has a nice little tag phrase on the back. This one, I used my Cricut cutter to kind of make a stencil and it stuck on there beautifully. And then I just brushed the matte black glaze in one layer and then peeled the stencil right off. And you get these nice, clean, sharp edges. My handwriting stinks. So this was a great way to get that saying on there for them and not have to stress about it too crazy much. The bottom of it's a little dirty right now, but it's just dust that will wipe right off later. So trying to recreate something very similar to this, and we'll see how it goes. So I've got my wheel head here cleaned off. Got a little bit of clay. I should probably pick up a scale at some point. I know that weighing the clay when you're trying to make multiples of something makes it easier. Because when you've got too much or too little, you're not going to end up with the same size piece. Probably something I'm going to look at getting here in the next week or so, as I'm trying to make these guys. We've got our clay stuck down. Again, we're going to turn it on about as low as it'll go. Again, with some of these electric foot pedal wheels, having that slower speed, you know, how slow can you get it to go before that motor is just like, no. This is about as slow as this one will go. But again, we're gonna take the heels of our hands and we're gonna hit down and in just to create that cone shape. Oh, it came unstuck. So I'm going to kind of beat this back so that the bottom is a little more curved. One of the reasons I do that is so that when I throw it onto the wheel head, it kind of forces all of the air out from underneath. Because, you know, obviously this part down here, it's going to hit first and then it's just going to kind of spread down and out. Put a little bit more water here in the middle, because that's going to help it stick. That's a little better. Turn on the spotlight over here. I'm getting old. I need the extra light. Where I've got my wheel set up is kind of in a back corner of my garage, and I don't get a lot of natural light back here, unfortunately, but we make it work. So I'll get this going at a nice high speed to center it. Get it nice and wet. I'm gonna anchor my elbow back here in my hip. We're pressing in with our heel of our hand over here and down from the top. And this is probably the hardest thing for anybody until you really kind of get the hang of it, because you kind of got to manhandle the clay a little bit. And for anybody that's a little smaller, maybe not as much upper body strength, it can be difficult to push hard enough to get it centered. When it's centered, you won't see any wobble. When you look straight down on the clay here. And sometimes it can be hard to tell if you have some clay, like the little piece that's out here still. It makes it look like it's wobbling even if it's not really. So I always kind of go in and clean that outside little bit to make sure we're nice and centered. Still have a little bit of wobble in there. This is definitely going to be too much clay to make that cigar ashtray. Probably needed like half that much. But you learn as you go sometimes. Use my lovely new tool here. It's like best friend. So this is from Speedball, and basically it just helps you create this little center pocket without having to stick your fingers down into the center. And the way that it's made, it gives you maybe like 1/4 of an inch. Once these outside handles hit the top of your wheel head, you know that you've got 1/4 of an inch of clay between the bottom of your bowl here and the wheel head. So you can make sure that you've got plenty of space down there and you're not going to just poke a hole through. So I put a little bit of water in there, and then I'm just gently pulling this towards me to open up that center. All right. So nice clean center there. outside nice and wet so that our hand just gently glides around the outside here. That's just for support, because I use my sponge and kind of pull and push from the inside. If you see how my left hand is jerking a little bit there, it's because the clay is getting too dry in a certain spot, so it starts grabbing. I'm gonna pull up and make sure that rim doesn't get too thin. So I know from the angle it can be a little hard to tell, but every time I go in, squeeze some of this back out here, I'm making the bottom, this kind of edge from where the bottom meets the side, I'm pulling that closer to me to kind of thin out the thickness that's down here. And then I'm moving that up to make it taller as well. And it's all just a game of squishing trying to convince that clay to do what you want it to do. Sometimes the clay is going to tell you what it wants to do. And if you're new to this, don't feel bad about that. There's people that have been doing this for a very, very long time, professionally, and sometimes their stuff still doesn't turn out the way they thought it was going to. Sometimes it's just because we're distracted. Sometimes it's because there's a slightly weaker spot in the clay from where it was mixed. So like in the last video, the 169, there was a part where I had to just kind of take a section off and then keep going with what I had left. It happens. One of the things you need to think about as you're making your bowls or your vases or your cigar ashtrays is that you want the walls to be consistently thick all the way down, and the bottom as well. This is why we trim that little foot up into the bottom so that that's not way thicker than the side walls. For one, it will dry more evenly, which means less cracking. If you get your side walls consistent, then there's less trimming, so less clay kind of cut off. Slow this down just a little bit. Because even if you're buying the cheap clay, it's still expensive, right? Everything costs money. And everything costs time. And it's fantastic if you're just doing it for giggles, just because you like making it and you like having bowls that you made in your cabinet that you eat out of. But it still takes time and effort, and just like anything else, if something happens to it after you put time and effort and money, in most cases, into something, if it breaks or doesn't turn out, it can be a little disappointing. But you just gotta figure out how to move on from there. I need to thin these walls out just a little more. I am pushing in with my left hand because I want to make sure that it's going up and not flattening out into more of a plate shape. One of the keys to making sure everything is I lost my train of thought trying to make sure that I wasn't going to make this thing flop over. So if you'd stop talking, you'd make sure that it has the right shape and wasn't floppy. One fun tip that if you watch multiple videos of me making these, that you'll probably hear quite a few times. If this is something you do or you try as a hobby, make sure that you wear an apron. You have like a separate pair of pants that you always throw on when you work. Don't put those straight in your washing machine, okay? I had a teacher that I worked with for many years. Her husband was a professional potter, and he would put on clean clothes every morning and go out to his studio and make pottery all day, and then come in and throw his dirty clay clothes in the washing machine. And they went through so many washing machines. She was constantly complaining about having to buy a new washing machine because theirs just bit the dust again. And when I was in my pottery class in college, our professor explained to us that we needed to have, most of us just had a pair of like overalls that we could pull over top of whatever other clothes we were wearing that day. But she explained to us the reason why she always had on the same pair of clay covered pants every single day was because when you wash your clothes in a washing machine that are covered in clay, all of this clay will come out of your clothes and settle in the bottom of your washing machine drum. And then what does clay do when it dries? It hardens. It gets wet again, it turns into slush or slip, and then it dries and hardens. And it was just building up over time in the bottom of their washing machine, and it was causing the motor to get worn out because it was trying to spin all that heavy clay in the bottom along with the clothes and the water. So that's why their washing machines kept dying. Once I explained that that's not the best option for cleaning clay clothes, they stopped doing that. He started just keeping the same work clothes and just putting them on already covered in clay every day. And then obviously if he went out somewhere, he would change and put on clean clothes. But that was 15 years ago, and they haven't had to buy a new washing machine since. After buying a new one like 6 years in a row, they've now gone like 15 years without having to buy a new washing machine. So don't make that same mistake. Get an apron, get a pair of overalls. I don't typically get a lot of clay on my clothes. If I do, I will take my putty knife and kind of scratch the excess off the outside and then beat them a little bit with just my hand or anything that's handy to kind of get some of that extra dust out of them before I put them in the washing machine, so we don't have that issue. But this bowl is number 170. So if you would like to see the video of me trimming the bottom, and then follow along with how the glazing goes and how it turns out, just make sure you look for that same 170 to see those. And thanks for watching.